Ultra Instinct, the infamous technique used by the gods and unlocked by Goku in the Tournament of Power. In today's video, I'm gonna toss Deku a bone and say he just wakes up with it some random day, and bam, he now has Ultra Instinct. But obviously I can't just give him the real thing or his body would literally explode, be torn to shreds. So we're gonna make it a quirk and see what happens. If you enjoy the video, remember to hit the like button and smash the red button, seeing as only a small percentage of you guys are actually subscribed. And that said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We start a story in the perspective of a young Izuku, about 6 to 7 years old. Yeah, let's go with 7. So Izuku's simply sitting in the cafeteria, enjoying his time, unwrapping his Lunchables. Honestly, same old, same old. Bakugo was about to come up to Izuku to pull one of his usual quote-unquote pranks on Izuku by blasting an explosion right next to Izuku, scaring him and causing him to be like, "Bakugo, why'd you do that?" like usual. But instead, when Bakugo goes to throw that explosion towards Izuku's direction, Izuku this time just dodged. It was as if his body knew it was coming. Izuku didn't even know Bakugo was behind him, and for some reason, he moved without his body without him having to tell his body to move, if that makes sense, without knowing it. Izuku would look to see Bakugo behind him, and it's at this point that Bakugo would be like, "What the?" before he throws another explosion at Izuku, and Izuku would be like, "Bakugo, what's the problem?" Bakugo would say he's sorry about that, but he thought Izuku dodged out of the way for a second, saying that he should know better than to dodge one of his little pranks on him. And Izuku would say, "That hurt, Bakugo." From here, we would end up having Bakugo be like, "Yeah, whatever." And he ends up walking off with his lackeys saying, "Catch you later, Izuku," before he then goes on to leave with his lackeys and simply just leave Deku there to pick up the pieces. The very next day, Bakugo would be thinking to himself as he's walking right next to Deku if the same weird occurrence would happen again. And so Bakugo would decide, you know what, whatever, let me just try it one more time. And so Bakugo would go over to Izuku right before Izuku could even notice that Bakugo was there, and he was sure of it. Bakugo threw an explosion to the side of Deku, which Deku immediately dodged out of the way, before then standing up and looking towards Bakugo with a strange aura around his body, and his eyes had changed colors for just a second, before Izuku's body pretty much collapses onto the floor. Bakugo would look at him and say, "What? I didn't even hit him with an explosion." Teachers would come in and they would begin to pretty much call Inko on the phone and send Izuku to the nurse, where from here he would be picked up and taken to the quirk doctor, where they would be wondering what just happened. It's as if Izuku activated his quirk, Bakugo would say. "It's strange. His eyes changed colors. That's not normal, right?" And so Deku would be taken to the quirk doctor, where they would begin wondering if Izuku does in fact have a quirk. He ends up going to see another doctor, not Dr. Ujiko, and from here, Izuku is told by this doctor that it appears that her son, or Inko's son, actually does have a quirk. And it's strange. It's almost as if it doesn't belong in his body. It's incompatible with him completely. You're lucky that this quirk didn't rip you to limb from limb. This quirk is extremely powerful. It appears as if it gives you the ability to move on your own without yourself even wanting to react. It basically makes your body do things without you having to even try to do them. And Izuku would look to the doctor before saying, "Wait, so I have a quirk?" And the doctor would say, "Well, yeah," before Izuku would jump up with excitement, being like, "Yes, yes!" This man Izuku is so happy. But from here, what ends up happening is essentially Izuku would just, like I said, he's just happy. And so when he arrives home, he would end up telling his mom that he's going to begin working on mastering his quirk as soon as possible, that now there's hope for him to become a pro hero. He and Inko would go out to celebrate, and for the following next couple of years, Izuku would essentially do calisthenics, weight training, as well as a little bit of martial arts to prepare himself with his quirk, leading to an Izuku who's not half as shy and is also not cocky at the same time, because we have to keep in mind, Izuku cannot exactly master Ultra Instinct. This isn't something that he's just gonna night and day wake up and master. Whis is not there, so it's not exactly gonna be some technique from the gods, because Deku's body would literally be ripped limb from limb. It's just not gonna happen. So instead, it's like a toned down version in a version of quirk, which is still really powerful, just not half as powerful. I mean, if you take Ultra Instinct and divide its power by like 10, you still have Ultra Instinct, and it still would pretty much solo almost any other verse. So when it comes to its power, don't worry, it's still there, and its abilities are still there as well. That said though, what ends up happening is essentially we cut to the point where Izuku's just sitting in the back of the classroom. Bakugo walks in with his goons, looks to Izuku before giving him his usual snarl, and sits on his desk before putting his feet up and then proceeding to act asleep until the teacher eventually would walk in, throw papers in the air before informing everybody that he already knows they wanted to become heroes. Throws them up with the class cheering and pretty blatantly flailing out their quirks. Izuku would be one of the only people alongside Bakugo who wasn't going absolutely bananas for this. And so, when the teacher then begins to read off the list of people who want to go to UA, and Bakugo hears the mention of Izuku, he's like, "What? Izuku? What are you doing trying to get into UA? You don't belong there, you quirkless." Before he then stops and he's like, "Wait, he does have a quirk. You don't belong there. People like me only belong there. People with powerful, useful quirks. You can't even manage to use yours for 5 minutes. How do you expect to become a pro hero?" Deku looks at Bakugo and says that he'll find a way. He's been training, he knows that. And Bakugo would throw an explosion at his desk, which Izuku would dodge, and Bakugo would get extremely angry at, saying, "Always dodging out of the way. Why don't you ever fight back?" Izuku would look at him before being like, "I don't know. I guess I never had to." And Bakugo would look at him pretty angry before throwing another explosion, which the teacher would yell out, "Katsuki Bakugo, throw another one of those explosions and you'll be expelled." And Bakugo would quiet down before then going back to his seat and giving Deku a death glare. Deku would proceed to simply just sit there until the end of the class, and when Bakugo goes over to try to snatch his book out of Izuku's hands, Izuku's able to dodge out of the way, shove it in his backpack, and put it on his back, before he then looks to Bakugo and says, "So what do you want to do today, Bakugo? You want to try fighting again? I'll just get out of the way of each one of your attacks like usual." With Bakugo just rubbing some of the dust off of Deku's desk, being like, "You know, Izuku, I always have wondered one thing. How come you never fight back? I was been wondering, and I've come to the conclusion that it's probably because you can't. What's somebody like you gonna do in a hero world? What, you're just gonna dodge out of the way? How's that gonna help anybody? What happens when a villain is terrorizing people? You're just gonna keep dodging it? You won't be any help to anybody. You might as well be quirkless. Yeah, you can't get hurt, but what good does that do? Nothing. You can't even fight back against me, even if you tried." As he throws an explosion at Deku, and he dodges by leaping out of the way, slightly getting a bit injured by it, before Bakugo looks at him once more and throws another explosion that Deku uses his body to do a backflip with, barely dodging. Bakugo would grit his teeth before saying, "Whatever. Guys, let's go." Deku would end up essentially leaving the area, before then proceeding to take a different path home, seeing as he's already late. And once he would do so, he would end up going underneath the tunnel, just thinking to himself, "Another day of Bakugo being a jerk. I guess it's not unexpected. I'm used to it by now." And also thinking to himself that what Bakugo said was right. I mean, what good is he if he can't even fight back against these villains? His quirk of his is cool. I mean, at least now he has a quirk and he can't get hurt himself, but what good is it if he can't exactly stop villains? Just move out of the way and elongate the inevitable. What does he do? Izuku would ponder these thoughts for a while, until eventually a green sludge would appear right behind himself, coming out of a strange looking tunnel. When Izuku would turn back around, he would see the sludge villain about to approach Izuku, as it would say, "Give me your body, kid." And Deku would look at it before saying, "Ugh!" And his body would immediately jump out of the way, and he essentially begins dodging, jumping, leaping all over the place, avoiding the sludge villain. Even its fastest attacks, Izuku's able to slightly keep up with it and barely stay out of its range of attack. The sludge villain would eventually begin getting very, very tired and being like, "What's your deal with this kid? Fight back or something at least. Run away, you're making it boring. I need your body, kid. I didn't know he was in town." And Izuku would say, "What are you talking about? You don't know who was in town." Before suddenly, you can hear some like strange background music. Well, obviously you can't hear background music, but it's almost as if Izuku could hear it in his mind. When he saw All Might bust out of the tunnel, he could hear the dun da 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 da, like strange All Might theme song basically from season 1. Izuku would just look as he was standing right in front of the sludge villain, who just turned its eyes and looked at All Might, got scared, and All Might looked at it before saying, "Texas smash!" Throwing a full power blow at the sludge monster. The sludge monster would proceed to just get splattered all over the walls as Izuku remained standing there, being like, "All Might!" As All Might would just look at Izuku, and Izuku would explain to All Might that he's his biggest fan and that, he would like his autograph. All Might would begin laughing, and Izuku would actually help All Might collect the pieces of sludge in the bottle, before then proceeding to look to All Might and tell him that he has been his biggest fan since he can remember, and that he's one of the biggest reasons why Izuku tries his hardest every single day to become a pro hero just like him. All Might would tell him he's doing a great job and that he hopes to see him at UA if that's where he's going, and Izuku would be like, "Oh, definitely," before he would say, "What do you mean see me at UA? I won't see you again, right?" All Might is like, "Oh, no, yeah, you won't see me again," before he then proceeds to take the sludge villain and be like, "Well, I'm off, citizen," before he then jumps off, and just because I need this to happen, he drops a sludge villain bottle. Okay, I know it wouldn't usually happen unless Deku was on his leg, but let's just say that it happens because plot, okay? That said, he would end up dropping the sludge villain just like usual, and Izuku would end up inevitably hearing explosions. When Izuku would hear this, he immediately would turn his attention towards the direction and begin running towards them, hoping to see the villain attack or the heroes in action. When he would arrive, he would be towards the back of the crowd as he would be wondering what the heroes are doing to stop all this. He looks around as he sees a bunch of different heroes and he's like, "What are they doing?" But then he hears a bunch of muttering from the crowd saying, "What are the heroes doing? How come they don't act?" Suddenly they would begin to say that the heroes don't have the right quirks, and it's at that same moment that Izuku would catch wind of who was exactly the person that the sludge villain had under its quirk. He would turn to see Katsuki Bakugo, his classmate, childhood friend. And when Izuku sees this, it's almost as if Ultra Instinct would snap into his body right at the right time. And Izuku would gain a visible Ultra Instinct sign aura around himself. His eyes would slightly change color, and he begins to essentially get a strange tint to himself as he begins running with his body simply running in front of everything. The sludge villain would begin trying to throw its arms and stuff at it, but Izuku would throw his backpack towards the direction of the sludge villain before dodging and jumping out of each and every single one of its attacks, not by just dumb pure luck, but because of simple skill. People would begin yelling, "Kid, get out of the way!" But Izuku is just far too gone into this, and he can't simply stop himself at this point. Izuku would turn to the direction of the crowd and he would say, "I have to do this," before his body just begins moving. Izuku could only think to himself in his consciousness, "So crap, oh crap, oh crap, what am I doing?" But his body is just doing all the work for him. He eventually makes his way towards Bakugo and begins trying to gnaw off all the sludge off of him before trying to grab his arm and try to actively rip Bakugo out of it, giving Bakugo precious seconds to breathe, as suddenly the big bad All Might would arrive, and he would say, "United States of Smash!" before he then promptly changes the weather, and the sludge villain would be splattered to pieces everywhere. Izuku would look to Bakugo's direction as Bakugo begins coughing out some sludge from his throat, and All Might would look to Izuku before giving him a smile and a thumbs up. Everybody would watch this as the pro heroes would be just they don't know what to say, because clearly Izuku was able to dodge out of the way for long enough for All Might to arrive, but what if things had gone differently? They would still scold him and tell him that he shouldn't do that, and then Izuku would inevitably just walk home, thinking to himself that he at least tried. Izuku would think that, that's a good thing, and he would begin continuing walking home before suddenly All Might would appear before him. Editing Zither here, I completely forgot to add the sponsor, so here it is. As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code ZETHER at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video. And when Izuku sees All Might, he'd be like, "All Might, what are you doing here?" Before All Might begins to tell him that he saw the way that he performed out there, and he would tell him that that's something that only a true hero would do. It was almost as if his body moved on his own. He would look to Izuku before asking him what quirk he has, and Izuku would say, "It's a little hard to explain, but essentially, my body moves on its own." All Might would say, "Wait, seriously?" And Izuku would be like, yeah, before rubbing the back of his head, being like, essentially, I can dodge things basically without having to think about it. I still can't hit things without thinking about it, but I can dodge and I can switch in and out of dodging things and trying to actively think. So that's pretty much how I've been fighting for the past couple of years. And All Might would be kind of dumbfounded by this before then saying, well, that's an interesting quirk. He would ask if it makes him any stronger, and Izuku would be like, not really. I'm still just like everybody else. I just do a little bit of training here and there. And All Might would be like, he begins laughing before then looking to Izuku and saying that he has guts for doing what he did back there. For Izuku would be like, yeah, but what about my quirk? Why is it that you want to know, All Might? And All Might would say, right, I'm gonna get to the point, kid. Before his expression turns to that of more of a serious one, and he then begins to explain his injury to Izuku, telling him that he got this a couple years ago, with Izuku looking at it being like, was it against the battle against Chainsaw Man? All Might would say, close, but not quite, kid. He would then begin to explain that he fought against a villain unlike any other that the world has ever seen before, and that this ended up happening. That he's been looking for a successor for quite some time. And Izuku would be like, wait, back it up. Are you trying to say you want me to take one for all? Before All Might would say, that's exactly what I want. And Izuku would be like, but quirks can't be passed on. What are you talking about? And when I said one for all, I mean your quirk is what I should have said instead of the actual name. But All Might would then begin to explain the nature of his quirk and how he can actually pass it down. And once Izuku hears the brunt of all this, he then looks to All Might and says, but why me? I mean, I can barely control my own quirk, and it took this long for me to barely even be able to use it in short bursts. I might as well be quirkless. Before All Might looks to him and says, look, young man, I understand your doubts, but that heroic heart that you just displayed out there, that's something that not many other heroes have. You saw the way those heroes simply stood by as that kid clearly needed help. We need more people like you in this society. That's why I chose you to be my successor. For then getting eye-to-eye level with Izuku and telling him that he knows he once used to be quirkless himself. For Izuku looks at All Might and says, no way, you? Quirkless? But you're All Might. All Might would look at him and say, so what does that mean? I mean, yeah, I'm All Might, but that doesn't really amount to anything when you look at a big picture. Izuku would just look to All Might, look down, and say, yeah, I'll take the quirk. All Might would smile before plucking out a piece of his hair and then looking at Izuku's body, being like, can you take your shirt off for me? Izuku would be like, hold on, All Might, I didn't know you were that kind of hero. And All Might would be like, no, kid. I mean, for my quirk, I just want to see if your body's physically ready for it. And Izuku would do so before All Might would see that Izuku is clearly in tip-top shape. He's about the same body build as like he was at like season 4 or around there. So yeah, Izuku would look to All Might before then being like, look, here's what I'm working with so far. And All Might would be extremely happy with, you know, the shape that Izuku's in before passing him the hair and being like, eat this. Izuku would take it in his hand and be like, sure thing, All Might, before gobbling it down and be like, ugh, I never have to do that again. And All Might would say, it's just a one-time thing, young man. Before then looking to Izuku and telling him to meet him at this spot the next day, giving him his number and then nodding to Izuku before Izuku would go home at night, and Inko would begin freaking out, being like, you were at a villain attack? Not only that, but you're so irresponsible, before, you know, getting down on Izuku and just being like, she's just glad he's safe. Izuku would then get some grub, pass out, and the next day immediately run off to Degoma Beach to meet All Might. This is where he would go towards the direction that All Might gave him, and he would proceed to essentially be like, so All Might, what's our first task of business? All Might would look at Izuku before then saying, oh, our first task, cleaning this beach. And All Might would be like, yep, clean this beach. As Izuku's dumbfounded, he's like, ain't no way you want me to clean this beach. And All Might would be like, oh, there is way. You're gonna clean this beach top to bottom, and you have 10 months to do so, while you're also going to be doing strength and conditioning training with me, and also trying to learn your quirk for about an hour a day. All Might would then look to Izuku and then tell him to try it out, before he then looks at him and tells him to squeeze his butt cheeks and from the bottom of his heart say, smash! Before he then looks towards Izuku, and Izuku would just clench his fist up, breathe in, I can do this. he would reel his arm back and say, "Smash!" before he then throws a full power punch and pretty much shatters his arm. Izuku would look at his arm and be like, "All Might, what happened?" And All Might would be like, "Okay, maybe don't do that." Before Izuku would then begin to be rushed to recovery girl at UA, and she would heal him up a little bit. She would tell All Might that he was reckless, and that if he's gonna be teaching this young man how to use his quirk, he at least has to try to do something right, not letting him break every bone in his body. With All Might holding the back of his head, being like, "Yes, didn't think about that. I mean, I could use the quirk off rip, so I just assumed he would as well." Before he then looks towards Izuku and says, "Looks like we're gonna have to do some work." And about 2 days later, when Izuku's arms is a little better, he begins doing his strength and conditioning training. Until eventually, about 6 months would pass and the entire beach would be clean. Since All Might told him that he was not allowed to use his quirk, Izuku had to do it with nothing but his raw physical strength, ending up amassing to Izuku getting a huge boost in his physical strength, leading to Izuku having a better grasp of One For All when he's finally able to use it in full cowling, which he does eventually end up learning, not because of Gran Torino, because keep in mind, he's not going to be meeting him until like season 3, I believe it was. So Izuku instead has to figure these things out on his own, and boy does he deliver. This man ends up tapping into full cowling out of nowhere, and when he feels the power going through his body, he's shocked. It's almost as if for the first time ever, he feels as if he could genuinely break through his limits. Not only that, but his quirk of Ultra Instinct actually ended up getting a boost, because that's what All For One is. It's a stockpiling quirk. So it helps him out in the long run, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see him use it during the rest of the series. So that said, Izuku would look to All Might before All Might would tell him to test it out. Izuku would test out One For All, and he would look to Izuku before saying, "All right, young Izuku, we're going to do a little bit of sparring to find out where you're at." Izuku would look at him and say, "Right." Like for part 2.